They thought it was just another night. Dinner had been quiet, the kids were in bed, and the soft hum of the TV filled the living room as the parents dozed off. Nothing unusual. Until, at 2:14 a.m., their dog, Milo, bolted into their bedroom. Barking, scratching, refusing to stop. At first, they thought he just needed to go out. But he didn't run to the door. He ran toward their son's room. And what they found when they opened that door would change their lives forever. It was one of those quiet evenings where nothing stood out. The kind of night families forget by morning because everything had gone exactly as expected. The sun had dipped below the trees hours ago, casting long shadows across the driveway. Inside, the walls of the Preston home glowed with the soft light of table lamps and the flicker of a muted TV. Lena was half asleep on the couch, her legs curled beneath her, a mug of chamomile tea resting lukewarm in her hands. David sat beside her, reading emails on his tablet with one eye while the other stayed on the clock, counting down the minutes until he could finally unplug. Upstairs, their 15-year-old son Ben had just finished a round of his favorite online game. He rubbed his eyes, placed his headset on the hook beside his desk, and glanced toward his bed, where Milo, their 12-year-old golden retriever, was already curled up like a cinnamon roll, his face tucked into his tail. Ben smiled softly. Milo always waited for him. He reached down to scratch behind the dog's ears, whispering, "You tired, bud?" Milo's tail gave a lazy thump against the sheets. Ben took that as a yes. Across the hall, Maya, his 10-year-old sister, was already tucked under her mountain of stuffed animals, reading a graphic novel by flashlight. It was past her bedtime, but nobody had the energy to enforce it. Milo had made his rounds earlier, checking in on her as he always did. A quick nose nudge and a little huff, like a protective older brother making sure she was where she was supposed to be. The house exhaled into silence. No drama, no surprises, just the normal end to a normal day. By 11:30 p.m., the lights were out, and by 2 a.m., the house was still, except for Milo. He stirred before anyone else. It started with a twitch of the ear, a slight lift of his head. Something was off. He sniffed the air once, then again. Nothing smelled wrong. No burning. No storm outside. But something deep inside him tightened, something primal and old, the kind of instinct that can't be trained or explained. It was just there. He stood up on the bed slowly, his paws making the softest thuds against the mattress. He padded across the room to Ben's side. Sniffed. Tilted his head. Something wasn't right. Ben's breathing was too still. Milo leaned in, nudging Ben's shoulder with his snout. No movement. He let out a low whine. Still nothing. Then something shifted. Ben's body twitched. A jerk. Then another. His leg kicked out like he was dreaming too hard. But Milo knew this wasn't sleep. The energy in the room had changed. He could feel it in his bones. The next moment, Milo was out the door. He didn't bark immediately. He ran down the hallway, paws thudding against the hardwood. He reached the bottom of the stairs and paused, looking back toward Ben's room. Then forward again. Then he barked. Once. Then again. Louder. Downstairs, Lena shot upright on the couch, spilling cold tea on the blanket. David looked up from his half-sleep, blinking hard. Was that Milo? Lena said, confused. David rubbed his eyes. Maybe he needs to go out. But the barking wasn't coming from the back door. It was moving, urgent. Milo burst into the living room, circling them, barking and whining. He ran to the stairs, then back to them, then up one step. Barked again. Milo, what's wrong, boy? Lena said, standing now. The dog's eyes were wide. He barked sharply, insistent. That's when she felt it, that invisible thread of dread wrapping around her spine. David was already moving. Something's wrong. They followed Milo up the stairs, their feet barely hitting the steps. He led them straight into Ben's room. What they saw stole the air from the room. Ben was on the floor, his body rigid, limbs trembling, foam at the edge of his mouth, his eyes wide but unseeing, fluttering like something inside him was stuck halfway between here and gone. Lena let out a strangled cry and dropped to her knees beside him. Call 911, she shouted. Now. David fumbled for his phone, his hands suddenly useless. He hadn't seen anything like this before. Nobody had. Not Ben, not their quiet, healthy, video game-loving boy. Never. Milo stood by Ben's side, unmoving now, his body pressed close, tail low, ears back, guarding him, watching him, not letting anyone touch him without his approval. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the phone as David struggled to explain what was happening. The words seizure, teenager, and not responding floated through the air like curses. And through it all, Milo stayed. He didn't bark, didn't flinch, just stayed right beside Ben like a shadow stitched to his soul. The house was no longer quiet. The flashing red and blue lights painted the walls of their quiet street like a warning. At 2:28 a.m., the ambulance arrived. David was already outside, waving them down, his phone still clutched tightly in his hand. Inside, Lena sat on the floor next to Ben, her hand cradling his motionless fingers. She kept whispering his name, her voice trembling like the house in an earthquake that had come without warning. Milo hadn't moved. He was still lying beside Ben, one paw resting lightly on the boy's leg, as if by keeping contact, he could keep him anchored. Even when the EMTs came rushing in, carrying gear and clipped voices, Milo didn't budge. One of them crouched, taking in the scene. "He's still seizing?" the young paramedic asked sharply. Lena nodded helplessly. "About 5 minutes now, maybe more. We didn't know at first. He was asleep. He was fine before. He was fine." "Ma'am, we need space," the medic said. "Is the dog safe?" David was already moving toward Milo, but the dog's eyes met his. Not a growl, not a snarl, just that intense, pleading gaze, a question, almost. "You'll take care of him now?" "It's okay, buddy," David said softly, his voice cracking. "They've got him. Come on, Milo. You did so good." He reached out and gently touched Milo's collar. The dog hesitated, then stood and backed away, slow and reluctant, eyes never leaving Ben's face. He sat in the corner of the room as the medics worked, tail tight to his side, head tilted low. He didn't understand what was happening, but he understood enough to know it mattered. The silence after the seizure was worse than the seizure itself. Ben lay still now, unconscious. The foam had cleared from his mouth, but his lips were pale. One of the EMTs checked his vitals, nodded grimly, and began giving instructions. "We'll stabilize him on the way. Parents, who's coming?" "I am," Lena said quickly, grabbing her coat without even thinking. David stood frozen in the hallway as they rolled Ben out on a stretcher. The wheels thumped against each step. Milo followed behind them until they reached the door, then stopped, whining softly as he watched his boy disappear into the back of the ambulance. The doors slammed shut. The engine rumbled to life. And just like that, they were gone. Inside the house, the quiet returned. Maya had woken up at some point, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. David knelt beside her now, his arms wrapping around her small frame. She was crying quietly into his shoulder. "What's happening to Ben?" she asked, her voice muffled. "Is he gonna die?" David didn't answer right away. He couldn't, because the truth was, he didn't know. By 4 a.m., the house felt like it didn't belong to them anymore. Ben's room was still, his bedsheets rumpled, his controller on the floor. David sat on the edge of the couch, his phone on the coffee table, silent. No updates yet. No answers. Just the growing ache in his chest and the echo of Milo's footsteps circling the front door again and again. The dog wouldn't lie down, wouldn't eat, wouldn't drink. He kept pacing, occasionally sniffing at Ben's bedroom, then returning to the window, waiting. David watched him move, his heart breaking in a way he hadn't expected. He'd always known Milo was loyal. Everyone did. But this was something deeper. At around 4:17 a.m., the phone finally buzzed. It was Lena. "He's stable," she said softly, as if afraid saying it out loud might break the spell. "They've given him medication. He's sleeping now. They're running more tests. They think it was a tonic-clonic seizure. A major one." David closed his eyes. He couldn't say it. The word stuck. Did he hurt his brain? Is he going to be okay? "They don't know yet," Lena whispered. "But they said, if it had gone longer, if we hadn't found him in time." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to, because both of them were thinking the same thing. Milo did this. Later that morning, as the sun rose behind soft gray clouds, David let Milo out into the backyard. He watched the dog stand at the edge of the lawn, looking around like he didn't quite understand why everything felt so quiet. He didn't chase the birds like he usually did, didn't wander to the fence. He just sat, waiting. David came down the steps and sat beside him on the cold concrete. She said we were lucky, he murmured, that it could have been worse, that if it went 10 more minutes. His voice cracked. Milo looked up at him, his big golden eyes searching. David scratched his ears. You saved his life, bud. You really did. Milo pressed his head into David's chest and let out a long sigh, almost like a cry. And for a long moment, they sat like that, man and dog, sharing something far deeper than words could reach. Back at the hospital, Ben opened his eyes for the first time. The light hurt. His head pounded. But he was there, breathing. Lena rushed to his side, choking on tears of relief. She held his hand tightly and brushed his hair from his forehead. Hey, baby, she whispered. You scared us. Ben blinked slowly. What happened? Lena swallowed. You had a seizure. A big one. But you're okay. You're here. He looked confused, unfocused. How did you know? She smiled through her tears. Milo. Milo woke us up. He ran to our room. He wouldn't stop barking until we followed him. Ben's eyes filled. He didn't say anything. He just whispered, good boy. The doctors had kind eyes, but their words were loaded with medical terms that felt heavy and fragile at the same time. EEG, neurology, MRI, observation, monitoring, overnight stay, possible epilepsy. Ben sat quietly in the hospital bed, propped up by stiff pillows and the occasional beep from nearby monitors. He didn't speak much. He just nodded when he had to. His face looked pale beneath the fluorescent lights, his usual spark dimmed by something deeper than exhaustion. Lena stayed beside him, not letting go of his hand. She smiled when he looked at her and gently wiped the crust from the corner of his eye when he didn't. Outside the window, clouds moved slowly over the city, casting everything in a soft, gray blur. Back at home, the silence had shifted. It wasn't the comfortable kind anymore. David moved through the house like someone walking through a museum of their own life, stopping in each room, staring a little too long at things that had always just been there. Ben's backpack, his shoes still kicked off near the front door. A plate of uneaten cookies on the kitchen counter from the night before. Everything was the same, but everything was different. And Milo knew it too. He hadn't gone back upstairs since the ambulance left. He'd spent the morning lying near the front door, occasionally glancing toward the driveway like he was waiting for the boy to return. Every time a car passed, his ears perked up, and then dropped again. Maya tried to sit with him once, placing her tiny hand on his back, whispering, "It's okay, boy. He's gonna come back." Milo leaned into her, but his eyes never left the door. That afternoon, David got the call he'd been waiting for. Ben was awake. The scans were done. The doctors believed it was his first known seizure, though it likely wasn't going to be his last. He'd be discharged in the morning with medication and a referral to a neurologist. They wanted him to rest, stay hydrated, and avoid screens. And they wanted the family to be ready, because the next time could come without warning. David thanked them, hung up, and leaned back in his chair. Relief didn't hit all at once. It came slowly, like the first hint of sun after days of cold. He looked over at Milo, still curled near the door. Tomorrow, Bud, he said softly. Tomorrow we get our boy back. That night, the house remained still, but this time, nobody slept deeply. David lay awake in bed, his mind circling every what if. What if Milo hadn't noticed? What if they'd ignored the barking for just 5 more minutes? What if Lena had said it in the hospital, but David hadn't fully felt it until now? They had been saved. Not by luck, not by timing, by a dog. An aging, gentle, golden dog who had somehow known, with no training, no command, that something terrible was happening. And he had acted, without hesitation, without thought for himself, just love. When morning came, Milo was already at the door. His tail wagged slowly, his body brimming with something just shy of excitement, as if he knew. David chuckled, rubbing his head. You know, don't you? By 10 a.m., Lena and Ben pulled into the driveway. David opened the door before they even rang the bell. Milo was already there, nose twitching, body trembling with anticipation. The second Ben stepped through the door, Milo surged forward. But he didn't jump. He didn't bark. He approached slowly, gently, like he understood Ben was fragile. Ben knelt, arms out. "Hey, buddy." Milo pressed his head into Ben's chest and let out a soft, relieved whine. And Ben, for the first time since waking up, began to cry. They sat like that for minutes, the boy and his dog, wrapped in a quiet reunion that words couldn't reach. Milo's tail thumped gently against the floor. Ben's fingers curled in his fur. His breathing slowed. His shoulders softened. He wasn't scared anymore. Not with Milo there. Later that afternoon, Lena made soup and cut strawberries just the way Ben liked them. David brought his pillows down to the living room couch, so he wouldn't need to climb stairs. Maya took out her colored pencils and made a welcome back sign that she taped, crookedly, to the fridge. And Milo? Milo never left Ben's side. Even when Ben fell asleep, Milo stayed right there on the floor beside him, his head resting just beneath Ben's hand. Every so often, his eyes would flick toward the window, checking. But mostly he watched Ben, like a guardian, a best friend, a silent promise that said, "You're safe now. I've got you." The house adjusted, not all at once, but in quiet ways. Ben wasn't allowed to shower without someone nearby now. He had to sleep with his door cracked open. His screen time was cut down to almost nothing. And every time he so much as stood up too quickly, Lena's eyes would follow him, heart caught somewhere in her throat. Nobody said it out loud, but they all felt it. They were scared. Ben tried to act like nothing had changed. He made jokes. He played board games with Maya. He even tried reading a book for once, though he kept glancing toward the TV like it was mocking him. But beneath it all, the weight pressed down. What if it happens again? Every little twitch of his hand made him pause. Every headache, every dizzy moment, it all came with a shadow now. And through it all, Milo stayed close. Like a shadow with fur. He'd become something of a fixture next to Ben's legs, in the living room, the bathroom door, outside during backyard walks. He even whined when Ben was in the kitchen alone for more than a minute. It was sweet at first, but by the end of the week, it started to feel heavy. "I'm fine," Ben said one afternoon, gently pushing Milo's face away as the dog followed him into the bathroom for the third time that day. Milo just wagged and sat right outside the door, waiting. "He won't let me breathe," Ben muttered later, slumping into the couch. David glanced over from the kitchen. "He's worried about you." "I'm not a baby." "I know," David said carefully. "But Milo doesn't." Ben didn't respond. Because the truth was, he didn't mind the company. He just didn't want to need it. A few days later, Lena picked up the phone to schedule Ben's follow-up appointment with the neurologist. Ben listened from the hallway as she talked. Her voice tight, polite, practiced. She asked all the right questions. What type of seizure? How soon can he return to school? How likely is a recurrence? Is this epilepsy? He didn't hear the answers. Just the sound of his mother trying not to panic. After she hung up, he walked back upstairs and found Milo waiting for him halfway up. The dog tilted his head, gave a low huff, and turned, leading the way. Ben followed without a word. That night, he had trouble sleeping. He lay awake, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to his ceiling from when he was 9. His thoughts circled again and again. What if it happens at school? What if I'm alone? What if people see me? What if Milo isn't there? He turned over to face the wall. Milo was there, lying beside the bed, just like always. His breathing was soft. His eyes were closed. But even in sleep, his ears twitched when Ben shifted. Ben watched him in the dark for a long time, then finally whispered, "You knew, didn't you?" Milo didn't move. "I didn't even feel it. I don't remember any of it." "But you did." Milo let out a soft exhale, like a quiet yes. Ben reached his hand over the edge of the bed and rested it gently on Milo's head. "You saved my life." For the first time in days, Ben's voice cracked. "I didn't even say thank you." The next morning, the family made a decision together. No more dancing around it. No more pretending this wasn't a big deal. They would learn. Lena spent the afternoon reading seizure first aid guides. David researched service dog training programs. Maya made a colorful seizure safety poster with smiley faces and lightning bolts and taped it to the hallway wall. Ben, for the first time, asked real questions. What if I'm at school and it happens again? What if Milo can't come? What if I fall and hit my head? And instead of telling him not to worry, David sat with him and said, then we'll make a plan. They talked through every scenario. And through it all, Milo lay by Ben's feet, as if soaking in the details, as if preparing. That evening, while Lena made dinner, David sat at the table scrolling through his phone. He paused on one site, then called Ben over. Look at this, he said. It was a program for seizure alert dogs. Not therapy, not just companionship. Training, real training, for dogs who could sense seizures before they happened. Dogs like Milo. Ben read the page twice, then looked at David. You think he could do it? David smiled. He already did, didn't he? Ben stood in the middle of the backyard, holding a tennis ball in one hand and a folded paper in the other. Milo sat in front of him, tail sweeping the grass, golden fur shimmering in the warm afternoon sun. David leaned against the back fence, arms crossed, watching. Okay, Ben said slowly, reading from the paper. Step 1. Build a consistent response pattern. Milo should learn to touch or alert when detecting specific signs, like zoning out or pacing. He lowered the page and looked at the dog. Do you think he already knows that stuff? Milo tilted his head. Yeah, me neither, Ben said, grinning. Guess we start from scratch. The decision to enroll Milo in seizure alert dog training wasn't just about safety. It was about giving Ben some power back, some control in a world that had shaken under his feet. It wouldn't be easy. Milo was 12, slower now, a little stiffer in the mornings, but something in his eyes still burned, like he had more to give. And Ben? He had someone to believe in. The first few sessions were done at home, following videos and online modules. The trainers were patient, understanding that Milo already had the heart. He just needed the structure. They started with basics, nudging when Ben went still, alerting with a paw tap, barking on command. And while Milo didn't always get it right, he always tried. Lena watched from the kitchen window one afternoon as Ben practiced letting himself go still, mimicking the early signs of a seizure, while Milo paced nervously in front of him. At first, the dog didn't know what to do. He barked once, then backed up, then sat. Ben waited. Then Milo slowly stepped forward and nudged Ben's leg with his nose. Ben lit up like someone had just turned the sun back on. Lena turned away quickly, wiping her eyes before anyone saw. As days passed, the training became a routine. Milo learned to respond to subtle cues, blank stares, frozen posture, even light hand twitches. And in return, Ben started to open back up. He began helping Lena cook again, carefully chopping fruit, while Milo waited beneath the stool for stray slices. He helped Maya with her homework, more patient now than he'd ever been. And most importantly, he stopped looking afraid of his own body. He knew Milo was watching, and that meant he didn't have to anymore. One evening, after a particularly long practice session, Ben collapsed into the living room floor with Milo beside him. I think he's getting it, Ben said, panting. He touched my arm before I even stopped blinking. David, lying on the couch with a book, smiled. He's a genius. Milo thumped his tail at the compliment. But he's also really tired, Ben added. Aren't you, buddy? The dog stretched and let out a groaning sigh. That old man groan that always made the family laugh. You've got an old soul, Ben whispered, ruffling his ears. And Milo, eyes heavy, let his head fall into Ben's lap like he'd just finished a full day's work. Which, in a way, he had. That weekend, the family received a small brown envelope in the mail, addressed to Milo Preston. Inside was a certificate from the online service dog course. It wasn't official, not yet, but it was a step that made Ben hold the paper to his chest and smile wider than he had in weeks. He showed it to Milo, laughing. You passed, dude. You're official now. Milo responded by sneezing in his face. Rude, Ben muttered, wiping his cheek. But fair. That night, as Ben lay in bed, Milo climbed up beside him, something he hadn't done in a while. The weight of him curled close brought a strange comfort. Heavy, steady, familiar. Ben stroked his fur absent-mindedly. You know, he whispered, I used to think you were just my pet. He paused, eyes drifting up toward the ceiling stars. But now I think, Maybe you were always more than that. Milo didn't move. I don't know what's going to happen with me, Ben continued. Maybe I'll have another seizure. Maybe 100. But if I do, I know you'll be there. Just like that night. His voice grew quieter. You're not just a dog, Milo. You're my partner now. The silence settled, soft and full. Milo exhaled a long breath and shifted, resting his head against Ben's chest, where he could feel every beat of his boy's heart. And in that moment, everything was still, not out of fear, but peace. Weeks passed. Summer melted into early fall, and the Preston family began to settle into something that looked like normal, but it was a new normal. One shaped by deeper awareness, tighter routines, and a stronger sense of togetherness. The kind that only comes after life reminds you how fragile it really is. Ben started school again. His teachers had been notified. The staff trained in seizure response. His backpack now had a medical ID and emergency meds tucked carefully into his side pocket. He hated that part. Hated the stares. Hated the questions. Hated being that kid. But every day, as he left the house, Milo would walk him to the door, tail wagging, watching, waiting. On the third day of school, Ben came home with a blue ribbon clutched in his hand. He'd won the science quiz, the one he hadn't studied for. And the first thing he did, even before telling his parents, was kneel down in the entryway and show it to Milo. We did it, Bud, he said, like the dog had been there with him the whole time. And in a way he had. Not every day was easy. There were nights Ben couldn't sleep. Nights he worried about every twitch. Afternoons where the headaches came on strong and fast. Days when his hands felt like strangers. But Milo never left his side. One evening, as the sun poured gold through the living room window, Ben had his second seizure. He was playing a card game with Maya, laughing, talking, and then his smile froze. His fingers dropped the card midair. His head tilted slightly. A blink that didn't end. Milo moved before anyone else even noticed. He barked. Once. Loud. Sharp. David spun around from the kitchen just as Ben slumped to the side. Lena dropped her mug. Maya screamed. And Milo was already there, pressing against Ben's chest, barking again, nudging him gently, alerting, just like he'd been trained. The family sprang into action. They did everything right. And this time, when Ben woke up a few minutes later, dizzy and sore, but breathing, he looked into Milo's eyes first. No panic, just trust. Later that night, after Ben had rested and the house had returned to a careful quiet, Lena sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his hair back. You okay? She whispered. Yeah, Ben said softly. I think I am. She looked down at Milo, curled tight at Ben's side, still alert even in sleep. You really trained him, she said with a small, teary smile. Ben shook his head. No, he said. He trained me. The next weekend, they took Milo to the park, his favorite place. The wind was cool, the leaves just starting to turn. Ben tossed a frisbee gently across the grass, and Milo bounded after it with a speed that surprised them all. People smiled as they passed by. A little girl stopped to pet him. A man in a wheelchair asked what kind of dog he was. Maya shouted when Milo did a clumsy somersault trying to catch the frisbee midair. They all laughed. It was the kind of day that felt simple on the surface, but rich beneath, like a celebration no one had announced, but everyone could feel. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, Ben sat down on the bench, Milo resting at his feet. David snapped a photo from across the field. Click. Ben looked up. What was that for? David smiled. Just wanted to remember this. This what? David lowered the camera. This moment, where you're not afraid anymore. Ben paused, then nodded. Me too. That photo went in a frame on the mantel the next day. Ben and Milo, side by side, eyes forward, calm, a boy and his dog. But so much more than that. Months later, as the seasons shifted again, the family still talked about that night, the one they almost didn't wake up. But they didn't talk about it with fear anymore. They talked about it with awe, because it had been Milo who changed everything. Not with words, not with warning, but with love. Years later, Ben would tell the story again. At a small college event, standing in front of a nervous group of incoming freshmen. He spoke softly. I'm here because my dog knew something was wrong before I did. I'm alive because he barked, and because my family listened. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, faded photo. Held it up. This is Milo. He wasn't just a dog. He was the reason I got back up. Back home, that same photo still sat on the mantel. Faded now, corners curled slightly from years of light. But still there. Always there. Because some stories never leave you. And some dogs never really do either.
Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our paw-some friends.